Hello everyone, welcome to episode 13 of Let's Design Diablo. In this episode, we continue to work on the texture in the bottom center part of the interface, and we also experiment with some glows behind the mana and health globe. We do that right at the end, just as sort of a way to inspire some thought going into the next stream after this, but it ends up working out pretty well, I think. At least as an idea. So here's where we begin. Here's where we left off last time. And, first glance, it's a good start. I think it's not really where we want to end up, of course, with respect to the texture in the bottom center, because we really don't know how that area is going to function yet. But we do sort of know that we want it to be textured, interesting. We want it to not look too symmetrical, and we don't want the texture to look copied and pasted, but we know we want something there. We want it to be able to hold some information that's relevant to the player. So that's quite enough information for us to get started. We have some Photoshop issues here because there begins to be way too many layers in the document for Photoshop be able to handle smoothly. So we take a good part of this stream and the next one too, I think, and even into what I'm currently working on, going through each layer and deciding whether or not we want to keep it. Most layers we actually do, well, I don't know, we get rid of a lot of layers in the process. But in the process of showing and hiding the layer to determine whether we want to keep it, we are presented with some interesting visual, how to say it. When we're determining whether a layer should be retained, we show it, we move it around, decide whether it has value, and if it does, then we have discovered something new. So if by unhiding a layer, by showing the layer, moving it somewhere, and seeing something interesting happen, well, we've then taken a step in the right direction with the design. So actually this process of going through every layer, which I thought would be rather dull, is actually not that bad. It's somewhat interesting, and it pushes the design forward actually in a lot of ways. So here's a layer that we weren't using, but that may have some potential, at least in this center section, because we do want the center section to be, I think, a bit darker and having less contrast than the sides, because we want it to be possible for text to be readable on top of that area. So what I'm doing right now is just masking out the part of the layer that is overlapping with the mana and health globe, because you definitely don't want that. But we're looking at it to see whether, to what degree we want that layer to be shown. We can mess with the opacity, we can play with the different blending layers, and I think we do end up with something decent here. It's just a matter of how dark we want that area to be, and we can always go back and adjust this layer based on what we put in front of it later on. So, but for now, this seems like a pretty good compromise, making it significantly darker, but not so much that you can't see the texture that's underneath. This is a layer that has, I think, the interesting part of this layer, which was also not being shown before, is that orangish band toward the center, which we can't see right now. Right now I'm looking at what it looks like when it overlaps with the mana globe, and it does create some interesting color in there, but that's not really what we want to be focusing on right now. We want the mana globe to be blue. So that layer that was just shown there for a second was one taken from the Diablo 3 interface that I was just using because it has that really nice crack in it. And I think I touched on last time, the fact that I really like that texture and that crack that they put in there, but it's duplicated, and so you can see it on the right and the left if you open the inventory, and like some other panel on the left in Diablo 3, which I think is an avoidable mistake. And right now I'm logging into Twitch for some reason. Having some technical difficulties this stream, but we do, for the most part, move past it and focus on the design. Really having a tough time with the Photoshop file. Okay, hopefully we're good now. I don't recall how many times we have to close Photoshop and open it again. I think quite a few, and we end up saving quite a bit because every time it quits, or every time you get that error with RAM, you can't save it, you can't do anything. So we end up saving pretty frequently throughout the rest of this stream. Just continuing to go through each layer to see what we want to keep and what we want to and what we don't want to keep, but it's going to take quite a while. If you could see, I think it's still behind my face, but the we're still pretty far down on the list of layers. You can't even see the scroll bar right now, which means that there are plenty of layers that we haven't addressed yet, and it's going to be an ongoing project, but a good one. It's not, as I said, not nearly as boring as I thought it would be to go through each layer. I was sort of dreading this, but when it became necessary, it's actually not that bad. So that panel was a Diablo 3 inventory screen, which just, I don't know, just for our reference, if we want to look at what the current state of that type of screen is, because I do want to, once the bottom bar is in good shape, move on to a panel like that. Okay, so what I'm showing and hiding right now, I believe, are just some borders, some lines highlighting edges of different textures, and there's a lot of them. So most of them we want to keep, but some we are throwing away. I don't know if you can see in the bottom left, you should be able to. The size of the file is coming down as we go through this, which is a good thing. Nothing wrong with a 2 gigabyte Photoshop file, but usually when it's that big, it's a print file at a high DPI. This is the screen resolution, so it really shouldn't be that big, and in order for it to get that big, there has to be a ton of layers for Photoshop to deal with. And that's what that's the real. It's not the size of the file that's the problem. It's how many. I think it's how many layers are involved in making this design look the way it does right now. So this is another of those same rock textures, but I did like how that one piece of it is it sort of nicely comes out of the background and up on top, and I think that's neat, and I'm not sure if we end up keeping that, but I think we do for the time being, because the idea here is just to determine what layers we want to continue to fool with and what we definitely don't need. So I just kind of put it somewhere that will be kind of thought-provoking when we come back to it later. Adding some color to the rock texture in the middle that's nearest to the health globe, and again just playing with the idea of whether or not to carry those colors into the background at all. You know, the red on the left and the blue on the right, and how to do that. I think there's some potential there. As I said many times before, but we don't want to do it in a way that's too distracting because the player's focus should be on the globes themselves. Also seeing some nice textures on the lower right in that little border area between the bar and the skill icon area, and liking that, so we kept that there for now. And again, this texture, just messing around with it, see if it has any value. I think that particular one we've used enough, so I think I end up probably not keeping this layer. But yeah, so on the right now we have this cracked border sort of thing, lower right, between the mana, the border between the skill icon and the bottom bar. I'm just seeing if we can replicate that on the left in a way that makes sense. I don't really think we end up being able to do that. But yeah, so this layer has an interesting crack on it, so just seeing if it makes sense to keep that somewhere or not, making it a bit more horizontal. I think we end up just probably tossing this or hiding it for now. Yep, moving on. Saving. Here's some text, and I think this prompts the idea to just see what some text would look like on top of that middle area. Typography is a really important part of any design if it includes it, and I've always really enjoyed, oh, here we go again. Okay, quitting Photoshop, coming back in. I've always really enjoyed typography and integrating text in a way that matches the rest of the design. So in Diablo we have such an interesting challenge. You have this font, this iconic Diablo font that breaks a lot of the rules for typography in terms of readability. It's kind of messy, but that's the aesthetic of Diablo. It doesn't need to be perfectly readable. It needs to convey the tone of the Diablo series. And in Diablo 3, I think the designers chose to move away from it a little bit. You still see it a lot, but you don't see it in the places where you used to, namely items on the ground. Places in the interface are now sans serif font, something very, I don't know what it is exactly, but it's something very standard. And that has always bothered me, because Diablo is not about making everything clean. It's about making things, it's about sort of it's about conveying a certain like creepy aesthetic, a certain feeling in the player that clean font really doesn't do. So while this Diablo font is not the easiest font to read, and probably people who study typography would cringe at using it using a lot of it, too much of it, we actually need to just pour it on almost everywhere, I think. And the guiding principle should be less text, but wherever there is text, it should be almost always in that font. So as we move forward, typography is going to be more and more important as we start to hone in on what the background textures look like. We're going to be thinking more and more about what information is being presented to the player. And more often than not, it's going to be in that Diablo font. Now, it's possible there's different versions of it. I don't know if the one I have is like the best one. We'll get into that, but we're definitely going to be going down that road more and more. And I'm excited about it, really. There's so much to talk about with respect to typography in Diablo. if you go back and look at Diablo 1, again, there was that center area that we're trying to bring back a little bit in the interface where that information was presented to the player. In Diablo 1, like when you rolled over a item, that's where its stats would show up. Again, I'm not saying we should do that here, because I think it's really nice to have the stats for an item right where your pointer is, but the fundamental idea of having this center console of information that's relevant to the player, we're going to be using that. We're going to be exploring that as an idea in the next Diablo game in this center area. So if you look back to Diablo 1, just in terms of typography, everything in that center area, no matter what text was being presented, is in the Diablo font. And again, that's like not... See, you can go one of two ways with typography and design in general. You can conform to rules and come up with something that works well and is relatively safe and nice and easy to use and all that. And in most situations, that's what your client will want. If you're like a freelance designer, your client will want something that works, that doesn't take a lot of chances, that's easy to use and is readable and clean. So in most situations, as a designer, that's what you're going for. You're going for a design that conforms to rules or well-established guidelines for readable text and stuff like that. The other way to go is by breaking those rules in an intentional and interesting way. That's really what we want to do here. That's what Diablo has always done, and Diablo 3 was a sort of return to a safer type of typography in terms of presenting information to the user. More along the lines of a World of Warcraft inspired typography or interface, where the information is presented in a very clean, crisp way, which sounds nice, but it actually is not what we're going for in a sense. I mean, we want the player to be able to easily understand what's happening, of course, but it has to convey a very specific tone. And anyway, I'm excited to talk more about typography as we go forward, but we're not doing that right now, as you can see. What we're seeing right now is this Diablo artwork that I think is creating an interesting texture on top of the health globe. It's like a smoky type texture in there, and I want to maybe capture that a little bit in the health globe. But this is a nice thing about showing layers that have been hidden for a while. Sometimes you just see something that you didn't see before because the design was in a different place. So we're trying to take some of that smoky like look and integrate it into the health globe, and we're having some moderate success with it. We're running into this issue where the mana globe is bright in the middle and darker around the outside, and the health globe is the opposite. I don't like that. I think they should be similar in that respect. They should be both probably bright in the middle and then darker around the outsides, because that gives it more of a spherical look, more dimension. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just making the center brighter, and then I'm going to try to make the outside a little bit darker. It's not working as well here as it does on the right, but it doesn't have to be perfect right now. This is all, this is still first pass at a lot of this stuff. So we just want to get it good enough that we can move on to and look at a different layer, continue our process of going through all the layers. So this is the Diablo, same piece of artwork, but just heavily filtered to be blue and very high in contrast. There's Ace Ventura. How you doing, Ace? Good to see you. He's a good friend of mine. Yep, saving that. Okay, and then why is Ace Ventura there? Because Ace Ventura is probably the best person ever. So this is that blurred texture that we put on top of the mana globe, and we decide not to use that. And then this, I think what I'm doing right now is just sort of sparked an idea, that little glow outside the globe up that sort of extends up as if it were, I don't know, like smoke or mist or vapor or something coming from the globe itself. Kind of sparks the idea of using that. Like, I think that looks really nice. It's not interacting with the background quite right, but if we're going to extend the color of the health and mana globes outside of their strict shape, maybe this is how we do that. And so I'm just trying to get the shape, the look and shape of that glow right. It's pretty subtle right now, and we actually go for it a bit more. We make it more, yeah, so that looks cool too. So it could extend out and onto the body of the angel and demon. So we get a little bit aggressive with it, because again, the idea a lot of times is to take an idea to its extreme and figure out where that line is, where it's too far, and then just bring it back a little bit. So where do we want it? Do we want it in front of her, behind her? Do we want a lot of it, a little bit? Do we want it to extend vertically? Like, in what shape should it come up and out? And now just bringing that over to the right. I'm sorry, to the left. Taking it a bit too far and then bringing it back. And so looking at it now, it's it has potential, but it's not quite right. It's just, there's no texture or anything to it. It's just like a brush. So I thought, well, what if we brought that smoky texture that we just used in the globe and made that the kind of shape of the smoke coming off of the globe? Turn it upside down so it looks like, I don't know, I think it makes more sense in this direction. It follows the path of it's more spherical that way. It sort of cups the shape of the globe. And so now it has a little bit of dimension to it. It looks more like smoke or something than just, a flat brush. And so I'm just trying to get the shape to look right. And so that's cool. It's like a fireball or something. I really like that. And maybe it's too prominent, but it's, it sparks some thought. And if anything, we want things to be more prominent as we, as an idea to this, and we can always bring it back. That's never an issue. Okay, so we're just leaving it there for the day, and that was good progress there. Most of it was technical, just getting the file under control, getting Photoshop to not crash on us, allowing us to save and all that. But in the process, we were able to make some progress on the design. And we were able to start our conversation about typography. So thanks for watching this video, and I will see you next time.